So, hello to the one person lurking in the chat, and of course, anyone who might be watching in the future. This is the belated first episode of Mob Month. So we're starting it, once again, we're kind of going a little bit chronologically through genre. And because we're starting off with 1931's Little Caesar.
Yep.
And in all, it's a good movie. However, it is very much a movie of its time in that it is a fairly simple, straightforward morality play.
Yeah, it's not a particularly long movie either. So it's only about an hour and 20 minutes or so. But it's a film with a interesting little legacy, which I'll might talk about a bit near the end for a bit of trivia.
Well, I mean, we might as well.
Or should we talk about it now?
Yeah, it actually has like an anti-racketeering law named after the main character.
Yeah. Now the main character in this is the guy Little Caesar is mainly known by his middle name Enrico or Rico, which is inspired the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. The guy who wrote it up, Bob Blakey, was a quite a big fan of this film, and for some reason, actually, when he was doing presentations on this new law, would show this movie as part of the presentation. So it's got a bit of an interesting legacy, which is kind of weird. But it's weird to see because the way the mobs are actually kind of portrayed in this film. To be honest, you wouldn't need the Rico statute to bring this gang down, in my opinion. Honestly,
yeah. Well, it's the whole, the cops know who's dirty, but they don't have the, evidence to pin anything on them.
Yeah, it's but like I said, in a way, this one very very straightforward early sort of mob film, I suppose. And it's probably what in the early 1930s. So gangster films are a bit of a rage at this time. So it is what it is. It's probably I said it probably doesn't necessarily hold up as well as perhaps stuff like The Godfather or Goodfellas is going to hold up. But
well, I see. I think it holds up well, but I did. The reason I said the bit at the beginning is because, unlike a lot of media we tend to cover, it doesn't have a lot of the technique and nuance in crafting it because it's an early fit. It was released in 1931. Basically, audio is still a new thing in terms of film craft.
Yeah. So, and I'm gonna say it does show a little. This film is uploaded in its entirety on YouTube. I'm not going to necessarily say where, but it is there. And I will say, the audio quality isn't the greatest.
Even like say streaming it off Amazon, you still get the little lines that show up every so often on old films.
Yeah.
But once again, it's very much a straightforward morality play.
Yeah.
Where the first scene is, and it's very much also just like scene, and then it's over. There's like it's kind of refreshing in a way, because it lets you fill in the narrative, the narrative tissue. It just shows, okay, here's what's important. Meanwhile, with a lot of more modern films, there'd probably be more more small character moments that aren't necessarily important to the story. And so like while Little Caesar is very straightforward and very simple, it's also very lean, because it's just boom, 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 here's what's important. Like it feels fast paced, just because of how the movie's cut.
Oh yeah, it does. I mean, it does move along at a brisk pace. So like I said, it's not a particularly long movie.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a lot of themes like ambition. Like ambition that can get a bit poisonous is a big thing in this story. Greed, those sorts of things.
Well, also, well, there's a reason I called it a morality play. Because if you take the beginning, and spoiler warning for a nearly century-old movie.
Yeah.
Because you have two main characters for the movie. Well, one, you have Rico and you have Joe.
Yeah.
And they begin in the same at the same point. And Rico, wants to be somebody. He wants to be a big, tough, mobster. He wants to have the respect. And he wants, all, like, he is ambition personified.
Absolutely, yeah.
Meanwhile, Joe, he just wants to dance and settle down with the girl. He's fine, like, just, if he can make a comfortable life, that he's happy.
Yeah.
And we kind of see there, over the course of the movie, though we are very much largely just centered on Rico's climb to the top and subsequent fall from grace. We see their paths diverge, and then once again, and then at the very, like the last couple shots of the movie, we get the moral, because Rico is shot to death behind a billboard, by the police, the police sergeant. And we have the famous, line that's basically the reason why this name is, why this movie's lived on. Mother of Mercy, is this the end of Rico? And Rico's, completely down and out and bleeding out from several Tommy gun, wounds behind this billboard. And then it cuts back to to a panned back version of the billboard, and we see that Joe is starring in his own theater show.
Yeah.
Where so the moral is the essential moral theme of this movie is basically crime doesn't pay. It may, you may be on top of the world briefly, but you're going to end up bleeding out in a gutter.
You're gonna have a big fall, is what's saying.
Well, if you just do some honest work and be content with your life, you'll have a loving, supporting wife, and you may end up a star.
Yeah. Very, like I said, very, very basic.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, though, it's so very simple as this is. I mean, there's a lot of mob movies that have similar sort of plots of guys that and their big rise to the top and then their fall. So I mean, there's a film that came out a year afterwards, which has got probably a more famous remake. So I'm always I was almost at one point just waiting for Rico to say hello to my little friend, which is a Scarface reference if nobody's watched that. But very similar sort of thing of guys who they come into this world of crime. That they're at the bottom, but they've got the ambition. They've got this blind, burning ambition to get to the top. Will do what everything they've got to do to get to that top and have unseat the current boss, because they want what the current boss has got, and then they want even more than what the current boss has got. But they end up having a really hard and sudden and very brutal fall. So it's something that's been. It's something this movie done. A lot of mob movies that have followed have, in certain ways, come back to this kind of formula.
Yeah. So that being said, it's like while that is the moral of the movie, based off the plot dynamics, there's another moral that the movie's pushing, where it's very anti-gun. Because it opens up with the verse from Matthew of those that live by the sword die by the sword. And pretty much every time Rico meets someone new, they're always like, oh you're always too quick on the draw. You're always too ready with the lead. And of course, when Joe gets his dancing job at the club, the girl that he, I forget her name, but she notices.
Olga, I think her name was.
Olga, or something like that.
Olga, I think.
She finds that he has a gun on him, and there's this whole scene about you shouldn't be carrying a gun. And then, eventually what ends up getting Rico done is the fact that he shot the special crime commissioner during a job because he was too quick on the trigger. That's the one thing they could pin on him.
Which is it's one of those golden rules in certainly American organized crime, and certainly is, you don't kill cops and law enforcement people, because it's going to come back to bite you in the ass badly.
And then, of course, Rico, who is too quick to, to pull his gun and, to carry a gun, ends up being shot in the gutter while, Joe puts his gun away. And he goes on, so it's like, while the plot once again is more a, crime doesn't pay overall kind of moral, and if you just, keep your head down and do good honest work, you'll come out on top eventually. The inclusion of that, those who live by the sword die by the sword, verse as an opening card also ties into this other moral of, don't be so fast on the draw, which is kind of interesting in terms of, 1930. Well, no, actually, I take that back, because America wasn't always so gung-ho about, packing heat as it had been.
Yeah.
Or as it is now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember when they actually did. There was some gun restriction laws passed around this time. I mean, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the exact date of it, but because of the Tommy gun in particular, I think even back then, I think perhaps fully automatic submachine guns, maybe not everybody needs to be having them.
Well, and also, back in what was thought of as the Wild West, there was actually a lot of strict gun control on the American frontier. And the only reason, the main reason why the gunfight at the OK Corral, gets made into a million movies every year, is because that's pretty much the only actual historical instance of what we think of as a Western showdown.
Yeah. Okay, I think that could possibly be a future media musings. One, but
well, basically any Western, with the exception of, say, those about outlaws, but any, Western that features a gunfight that claims to be based on his, true events, it is based on the OK Corral.
Yeah.
And on the whole, moral versus immoral, plot of, more, dichotomy of Little Caesar, it's interesting to see, how while we do see, Caesar fall, and it's, essentially played out as a moral play and a tragedy. It's interesting that he is still shown to be somewhat sympathetic.
Yeah.
And there isn't a strict dichotomy, because there is a line a gradient being that is shown in the movie, because you have the high level mobsters who are drinking cognac and and whiskey and such, and and Rico, who doesn't touch alcohol but will smoke a cigar, and then Joe, who doesn't partake in any
he doesn't seem to have any he doesn't really seem to have any vices, does Joe, really. But I mean, and you see that. I mean, and I suppose we might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But obviously, one of the things is the deterioration of this friendship between Joe and Rico over the course of this movie. There's probably something that happens later in the plot, which is maybe why Rico can still appear a little bit sympathetic. In a certain way, because there's something he just can't bring himself to do.
But but there's a reason I mentioned the fact that Rico doesn't drink alcohol. This came out in 1931.
Yeah.
Which, if I remember right, is still during the height of American Prohibition.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I'm trying to remember it, because it wasn't actually repealed until Roosevelt was elected. So this would be before then.
Yeah,
so it's another year. It's another year, 2 years later that it was after this movie was released that Prohibition was actually repealed.
Yeah, which is why I mentioned the fact that Rico doesn't drink, but he will smoke a cigar, as he's something in the middle between, the good, the moral and the immoral, which once again makes him the protagonist of a morality play, because in a morality play, like for instance, one we covered earlier, Dr. Faustus, you have a character who is in the middle, between morality and immorality, between vice and virtue, and who is pulled one way or the other, and either we see him go towards virtue and triumph, or we see him pulled into vice and thus suffer a tragic downfall.
Yeah.
And at the end, we've even seen him fall into the vice of hard drink, because he's in a flop house, drunk off his ass.
Yeah. And as I said, this is one of the things that I think, and this comes up a lot about Rico as a character, I think, as well, is just how actually quite openly brazen he is. That even though this is a guy who gets his way to the top of this, it's not like you can't really say that he's necessarily a great schemer or anything. And he's very blasé about publicly, calling out his bosses or whatever. Like with what's it, Sam Vittori?
Yeah.
He's very, very, throughout the course of the film, quite often publicly disrespects Sam in front of all the gang.
Okay, so I think there's a slight problem with this interpretation that you're going down.
Okay.
But it's an understandable mistake given how the movie is structured,
Yeah.
because because it is, like a series of clips, like essentially pulled out of a period that could be months, a period that could be a couple years, that could be years, because yeah, yes, he does, show open disrespect, you know, to Sam, as early as like 15 minutes into the movie. But that is right before he takes Sam's gang right from under him. And the way the movie is structured, I very much get the sense that Rico got in, and Rico was, making his inroads with the rest of the gang. And when we start see him mouthing off in public to Sam, he is at the point where he's got enough clout in the gang to where he's about ready to take over.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, it is like there's the time constraints here make it seem very, very quick and very.
Yeah.
I see where you're coming from here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, not a long movie.
Yeah. And it's very much, scene to set up the plot, and then cut, and then we have no idea, for the most part, what, how much time takes place between cuts. But the way it's structured overall, you get the sense that between cuts it's very much like a matter of weeks, maybe even months.
Yeah. Yeah, it could quite easily be. I'm trying to remember where we are with the plot of this, but I mean, but
well,
really,
we've largely been talking thematically.
Yeah, I mean, but as I said, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just like I said, it's going through the plot wouldn't take long at all, but it's a bit, as I said, I think the themes are probably a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things is obviously the big thing you mentioned this earlier that he kills Dunn in this robbery that the gang take part in, where they stick up a speakeasy or something. That is, I believe
Yeah.
they stick up. They during this, the crime commissioner gets killed, and he's killed by Rico. But I found something I found a bit interesting was the actual crime commissioner, who's obviously you'd think really now that he's in one of these places to begin with.
Well, well, no. See, I don't think.
Well, it may have just been a straight nightclub, actually.
Yeah, the Brass Peacock. What, like, I very much get the sense that the Brass Peacock was a straight nightclub that just happened to have been run by a mob boss, because the head, the mob, it's not Sam, and it's not Diamond Montana.
Is it Big Boy? I can't remember.
No, because Big Boy's the one in the shadows. We never even see him until near the end. But it's the one that eventually puts a hit on Rico.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because, he tells the head waiter to ask the crime commissioner to, Big Al.
Yeah.
Big
Al?
Yeah, I think it was Big Al.
I know there's Little Arnie as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and to come up and have a chat with him. and the the waiter goes to see the crime commissioner, and he says, "Oh, Big Al." And then the crime commissioner is like, "I didn't know that this place, you know, was associated by people of that caliber." And then he, he basically just gets up and leaves because now he knows that the club is associated with the mob. And
Yeah.
and you get the sense that, like, the only two cops that aren't, well, the police are, Bull is a bit, it is a, like, you get the sense that Bull is one of those cops that goes slightly dirty just to get his job done.
Mm. Yeah.
But the crime commissioner, like, he is squeaky clean because even the big boss couldn't get him to look the other way.
No, he and this yeah, and I mean this is the whole thing. That I mean the whole reason he gets shot is he's in the process of leaving the club.
Yeah.
When the gang comes in, and then obviously Rico shoots him, which obviously is the point where really Rico for the first time is maybe pissing off his superiors in there, because it had been all the guy in the shadows, Big Boy, had actually sort of decreed, no, look, we don't want any bloodshed here. It's you're going in to do a stick-up job, but nobody gets hurt, kind of thing. So it's to be avoided if possible, sort of.
Yeah. Well, see, yeah, because the boss had, like, was disseminating it down, throughout the organization that police are cracking down on the violent crimes, so we best keep quiet for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, not really for any benevolent reason whatsoever, But
Yeah.
like I said, as I said, violence has a way of bringing attention that you may not necessarily want at times if you're in a criminal organization.
Yeah. And so Rico shoots the crime commissioner. Joe goes back to Olga, and breaks the news to her because he just saw a man get shot and killed. And then Antonio, is having nerve issues. And but the gang makes it back with the money. And that's where Rico, pulls his power play.
Yeah. Basically, he pulls his power play, and really, as I said, kind of takes the gang out from under Sam. And so it's basically, you're gone soft, Sam,
Yeah.
And
and Sam, takes it. And for the rest of the movie, he's basically a loyal underling for Rico.
Yeah.
And though, mentioning Macbeth, there's a bit, there is some, like, self-fulfilling prophecies in there.
Yeah.
Because, Big Al, is well, because Big Al's feeling threatened by Rico's rise, and so he sends a hit, to take him out.
Yeah, so I think he's saying here. I think it was little Arnie that sent the hit, wasn't it? Or was it?
Or yeah,
I can't remember.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was the same. It's the
Yeah.
same. It's the same officer that owns the Brass Peacock.
Mm. Yeah, and it's that's this was the drive-by shooting that they attempted to have
Yeah,
him killed, wasn't it? And he only gets like a minor graze.
yeah, he gets shot in the arm.
Yeah.
That's actually a way that you can tell that while this movie is scene, it does take place over, it does take, like, the story takes place over an extended period, because we see his arm get treated, and for the next few scenes, it's in a sling.
Mm.
And then when he gets his, but he ordered the hit on Rico because he was, Rico was getting too big for his britches too quickly, and he wanted that, out of the way. Well, Rico finds out that, that he was the one who ordered the hit. So Rico's like, okay, fuck you. And walks in and straight up takes over his operation.
Yeah. I mean, you get this kind of feeling that Rico, after surviving this, you get this feeling he's feeling pretty damn invincible at this point.
Yeah.
Like, you took your best shot at me, I'm still standing. You can't do nothing to me. You got that feeling. This is how he's thinking right now.
Yeah. And once again, surprisingly for a mob movie, like, pretty much all of the takeovers are completely bloodless.
Yeah.
Like for a mob movie, there are only 3 on-screen deaths. Because we have
the commissioner.
We have Antonio, who was shot on the way to go to confession because he was going to leave.
Yeah, and then of course Rico himself at the end.
Yeah.
So.
And then 2 injuries because Rico, gets shot in the failed drive-by, and then one of his, underlings hits Joe.
Yeah.
And once again, it's both in the arm, which can be used to say that, can be used as evidence for the interpretation that Rico and Joe are supposed to be mirrors of each other.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's
also
very,
I'm sorry. I just saw something in the chat, and I'm too much of a meme lord to, like, ignore it. And I mean, the trailer did drop, so General Kenobi. Sorry.
Oh dear.
Okay, back to
Little Ceasar.
Yeah, back to Little Ceasar.
Yeah, I mean, I said like I said the relationship between Rico and Joe is it's kind of interesting here because there's a point, isn't really, Rico. Joe's sort of been trying to drift away from the gang, and pursue this honest, pursue an honest life as a dancer and settle down with, have this relationship with Olga.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things going on. Rico does have a genuine concern that Joe knows a bit too much about him.
Well,
but he's also more to the point. He's trying to pull Joe back in.
Yeah, well, because Joe is the one. Joe. Joe came to the city with him. They'd been friends their entire life. He trusts Joe.
He's someone. Joe's like, if he feels Joe's the one guy he can trust, as well. So, and so I suppose obviously there's a little, it's a little bit of that old adage. It's it's a lot easier to so say plot your rise to the top and get rid of the enemies that are in front of you. The less time you have to spend watching your back.
Yeah. And once again, another indication that this movie takes place over a longer period than what you'd get from the pacing.
Yeah.
Is like, a couple of times when Joe's mentioned, it's like, oh, we haven't heard from him in a while.
Yeah.
Because, like they mentioned, Joe not coming around as much anymore right before Joe calls, to warn them about the hit.
Yeah.
And then
So yeah, I mean, the fact that Joe also did warn him, I mean, you can see Rico sees that he's probably got good reason to trust Joe at a certain extent. The fact that even though Joe hadn't been around for a while, he found out that this thing was going to happen, and he tries to warn Rico that this is going to happen. So yeah, Rico's probably justified in thinking this is a guy I can trust.
Yeah. And well, and so, Rico gets called up to, meet with the big boss. And he spends, several minutes just gawking at the opulence that he's living in. And he learns that the big boss isn't very happy with Diamond Tony. And which is, earlier in the movie, that's who Rico wanted to be. Rico wanted to be, Diamond Montana.
Yeah. And now he sees there's way more than that even.
Yeah, and he's so, he's like, hey, you're on the up. Montana's out. I want you to take his place. I want you to add his turf to yours.
Yeah.
And you also get the hint that once again this is essentially going to be a bloodless coup, because the big boss will say once I have you planted.
Yeah. And I mean, there's the little line, isn't there, where you're looking at the opulence, and he's looking at like there's a painting that he's told's worth something like $15,000, and then
like a painting of I think it's King George. It looks like a painting of King George.
But he says something like along, boy, those gold frames must sure cost plenty of dough,
Yeah.
So yeah, he is very, so he's very much in awe of Big Boy, really, and
and
you can also see him sort of like, his ambition, but you can also see that probably his ambition's getting even bigger right now as well.
Well, yeah, and the next scene, he's talking to his second in command.
Mm.
It's like, you know, Montana's out, and pretty soon the big boy is going to be out.
Yeah, he's already like planning his rise to be where Big Boy is.
Yeah, which I almost wonder if that if that wasn't the move, like the reason behind the big boy's move,
Yeah,
because obviously, you know, because even in the context of the of the period that this movie takes place over, irregardless of the pacing, Rico's rise is described as meteoric.
yeah,
So if I were essentially the godfather of this operation, to borrow from a more famous mob movie that I think is going to be next week.
mm. It's
I
a bit of a
I
longer movie as well. Just saying.
yeah, I'd be wanting to keep an eye on I'd
Yeah,
be wanting to give Rico just enough rope to hang himself.
yeah, and from what little you see of Big Boy as well in this, you definitely get the. I suppose you get an impression that he's a little bit more calculating and scheming or whatever than Rico is.
Yeah,
Like I said, even though, like I said, it probably because of space, but Rico just seems very gung ho and blasé. But it doesn't seem like he doesn't come across as much of a schemer or anything. Where you get the feeling that Big Boy is a bit knows how to play the game a little bit
yeah,
more. Um, and because Big Boy's not just knows how to lead his gangs, but he's a guy. He's probably the guy who's got all the politicians and the cops in his pocket and all that sort of
yeah.
stuff. You get in the feeling, yeah, he can bring. Whereas you just don't get the feeling Rico really has that the sort of savvy that Big Boy's got.
Well, yeah, and Bull had Rico like Bull, like he's already in the crosshairs of the police,
Yeah,
like almost from day one. Meanwhile, like no one knows who Big Boy is
yeah.
unless you get a meeting with the Big Boy.
Yeah, he very he knows to stay in the background and not be out there publicly. Um, which of course is which is of course in real life, the most successful crime bosses have been the ones that have stayed in the
Yeah,
shadows and a lot less is known about them. Than the guys like the Al Capones and the John Goddies who
yeah,
were were made themselves very publicly visible and even like public figures.
yeah,
Um, you know, both both of whom ended up in jail eventually. And Gotti actually, if anything, destroyed the criminal organization that he took over.
yeah.
um,
Or to borrow from another franchise, it's what makes it's what makes the Kingpin so effective.
yeah, yeah,
Is Wilson Fisk can play the game of respectable philanthropist on one end and ruthless criminal overlord on the other.
yeah. Yeah. So whereas so really you get the film Big Boy is more that kind of character, whereas Rico, I said um Rico, you just he's not that. He can't play the game that way. There's no way. He's too brazen in really to be able to really.
Like,
and as we said right at the beginning, even if he gets to the top, he ain't going to be there long.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the brains, but his ego's too big.
Yeah, and yeah, indeed. And I mean, ultimately, his ego is what really is his undoing. In the end, because that's the button that is, that is the button that is pushed on Rico. Really, at the end, which is really leads to his downfall.
Yeah, it's his ego and his basically rooster personality.
Yeah.
Because after so basically Rico gets his promotion and he calls Joe. He has Joe come over and he's like, hey, I'm really coming up in the world. I'm taking the entire north side. I need you to be my go-to guy.
Yeah.
And Joe says no because Joe's happy where he is.
He's happy where he is. He doesn't want to get back into the life. He does not want to be. He doesn't want to be involved with with Rico and then the crime. He doesn't want to be involved in crime anymore. And I mean, it gets to the point, obviously, that Rico, not liking this, he actually gets to the point where he actually threatens both Joe and Olga unless he accedes to Rico's wishes. But I suppose Joe, to his credit, refuses to give in, despite the fact that really Rico's made that threat.
And he goes and runs to Olga, and and he's like, hey, we need to get out of here. I said no to Rico, and Rico's not going to take that. Happy. He's not going to take that.
Yeah.
And she's like, there's only one way we can do this legally. And so she calls the cops and says, hey, Joe wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
And Rico, shows up with the phone, like after the phone call's over, and pulls a gun on Joe. And this is probably like yes, Mother of Mercy, is this the end of Rico? Is it is the memorable line, but I'd say the scene between Joe and Rico, where Rico's got his gun out, and you see the camera zoom in on Rico and pan back from Joe. This is probably the best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, just based on just talking film craft at all,
And yeah, and it's just, I think the look that Rico's in portraying here, he's got the gun pointed at his best friend. And like I said, this may be one of those elements as well of why Rico does remain a little bit sympathetic. He can't do it.
Yeah.
He can't bring himself to kill Joe. Joe's his friend. He can't do it.
And he can't, and he even can't, bring himself to have someone else kill Joe for him.
Yeah, because the henchman steps up and tries, and Rico wrestles the gun away from him.
Yeah, and turns what would have been a kill shot into a shoulder wound.
Yeah.
And once again, like nearly identical to where Rico got hit when in the failed hit attempt.
Yeah. And
but and of course now that the now that the second in command hit Joe, of course Joe's going to turn in state's evidence on the killing of the commissioner, which means the entire police force just immediately clamps down on the entire operation.
Oh yeah, Rico's gang is just dismantled by the cop Lieutenant Flaherty. So why can't I pronounce that word? But his name. But he get his organization is taken apart.
Yeah,
and you really, although he hasn't necessarily gotten Rico yet. Rico's on the run, hiding now, and
he's only got $150 to his name, and he's staying in a flop house.
Yeah, he's actually almost really in a worse position now than he was when he first came to Chicago at the beginning of the film, when there was not much on him, but a bit of ambition to make it in the criminal world. He's made it now, but he's back probably in even a worse position than he was when he started.
And once again, even further signifying his fall from, grace, is he's turned to the bottle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Bulls comments in the papers finally goad him into calling the police to threaten him, and he pretty much and because of that the cops find him, but he was going out after Sergeant Flannery anyways.
Yeah, the thing is that the sergeant had basically made comments in the newspaper, and he'd really called Rico a coward and everything, and he's not, as we said, ego was what got him here. It was that he just publicly said all this stuff about Rico in the newspaper, and
Rico couldn't take it, so he called
it's like he feels like his manhood has been insulted here, that he's got that sort of and and makes the mistake of kind of getting on the phone and publicly calling him out, the copper out, and threatening him all the time they're tracing the phone call.
And of course, they run into each other under a billboard, and once again, great shot scene, because you only see the bottom bit of the billboard for the entirety of this scene, front and back, of course, because he hides for cover behind it. Not that cover means much, or not that plywood means much when you're talking about a Tommy gun.
As Rico's about to find out.
Sergeant is asked for a Tommy gun and is handed it, and tries to get Rico to give himself up. He he refuses to come out, so they just shoot him through the billboard.
Mm.
And you know, and the cops go back to see him bleeding out. Flaherty makes a comment about, oh, why didn't you come out and give yourself up?
Mm.
Though, even if he did, he was, he's a dead man either way.
Yeah.
And honestly, the bullet's probably the quicker option. And we get, the last spoken line of the movie where where Rico's, lying in the dirt, bleeding out behind a billboard, and he says, "Mother of Mercy, is this the end of Rico?"
Yep.
And then the camera cuts back to the front of the billboard and pans back, or to a further back shot of the front of the billboard, and we see that it's for Joe and Olga, who, have a theater show that's getting rave reviews.
Yeah. So, like I said, really just putting a pin on the sort of morality tale of what we were talking about at the beginning, that
Yeah.
now look, Joe and Olga are the ones who've made it now,
Yeah. And I mean, I can't say this for certain, but it seems to me that's basically that's fairly iconic of the mob, the mob genre pre-50s, where it's very much, morality play.
Yeah.
Where, essentially what's being sold to the audience as the spectacle is is the violence and the scandal, though it's which is really ironic since we're talking about Little Caesar, which has like 5 shootings and only 3 fatalities in it for the entirety of the movie.
Yeah.
But overall, they're essentially crime doesn't pay morality plays.
Yeah. It's I mean, it certainly is. It's like I said, it's fairly straightforward. Like I said, it's nothing particularly overly complicated about this film in a sense. It is a straightforward little morality tale. But yeah, as I said earlier, the sort of formula that's in this movie is something that the whole gangster and mob movie genre has gone back to time and time again. With mob movies that have followed, of the guy starting in at the bottom, is ambitious enough, gets his way to the top, and then has a really hard fall. And I mean, and not only is this just played out in gangster, this is played out in real life in the mob numerous times. Like a John Gotti, for example, who murdered his way to the top of the Gambino family, and but ultimately, even though he was cock of the walk throughout most of the 80s, he had a hard fall and ended up spending the rest of, not just the rest of his life in prison, but that criminal family has never been what it once was.
Yeah,
since his fall. It's something that's played out in real life as well. This.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could say it's, an example of art imitating life, but honestly, it kind of, like, especially in regards to how moralistic or how overtly moralistic Americans have uh, were back then about media portrayal. I mean, it's still an issue today, but it's not as it's not as blatantly powerful today as it was back then.
No.
It feels like, that formula had to be there. The mobsters had to see justice done at the end, because you have kids watching these movies, and you gotta show your kids that crime. Yeah,
exactly. And even with some of the films at the time where the gangsters were sort of, in some way seen as somewhat the cool characters or whatever, more so than the law enforcement at these times. The point is, they're still the ones that are going to fall at the end of this.
Yeah, they still reach tragic and noble ends because they did crime, and crime can't pay.
Yeah.
And it is like it is kind of depressing that that especially back then, but even a little bit now, most Americans are too focused on using media as a means of instruction rather than as a means of exploration.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you look at all the backlash about from the right, about, because the right's usually more gung-ho about pro censorship on the larger level. It's like, it's always, what are we teaching the kids? Are we teaching the kids that this is okay? Not. And media consumption isn't a story in it isn't supposed to be a story in, moral out process, because we've seen what happens when a medium of literary expression gets overly moralized. And I am going to gesture very vaguely in the direction of comic books.
Yeah, there's some of them up there. Sorry, Matt Powell, it's still there.
Yeah.
By the way, sorry, Cupcake, it's still there.
Yeah. Where for decades, the comic books as an artistic medium had been stagnating because of restrictions brought on it by pearl clutching moralizers. And only now we're working our way out of those restrictions, and out of the whiplash reaction to those restrictions. I mean, tying this back into the mob movies, one of the genres that was, highly popular before the CCA, but was outright banned by it, was crime. Like, crime as a genre. You couldn't do mobster comic books after the CCA took effect.
Yeah. Which there was a lot of crime comic books before the CCA as well, and and going
Yeah.
back to the pulp magazines, which were sort of the thing that in a way where the comics and the pulp so were very intertwined at one time.
Well, yeah, because the two biggest genres when it came to comic books before the CCA took place, because superheroes were kind of on their way out because had been too tied to World War II propaganda, and now that World War II was over, they were kind of sick of people didn't want to be people didn't want to see people fighting Nazis anymore. They had enough of that. So the two big genres on the block when it came to comic books were horror and crime. And those two genres were explicitly banned by the CCA, which is why nowadays American comic books, the American comics as a medium are essentially synonymous with superhero stories, because that was the only genre that could be profitable under the CCA.
Yeah. There's a reason in the 1980s she brought all the British writers over there to write. Marvel and DC brought all the Brits in to write comics through in the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah. But so I think that about covers it. Plus, a good 10-minute rant on my point about how about people over moralizing media.
Well, it's really, I mean, as I said, there's not a lot that you can. I don't think you can really deep dive this movie any more than we have, in all honesty. I mean, we've been going like an hour and a quarter, so we've gone for almost as long as the film.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, the film's not a long. When we've got a lot to say about a movie is when we ended up doing streams that are twice as long as the films. Then we've got an awful lot to break down, and
but here we haven't even hit the runtime.
No, exactly. So but it's still, like I said, it's in a way this was an important movie for the genre of mob movies.
Oh yeah.
This was very worth covering. Very worth covering.
It was essentially a founding text of the genre, and like most founding texts, there's not much you can say about it. I'm going to ignore the elephant in the room with that statement. Because I will say Tolkien is is kind of the one counterexample of a case where a foundational text of a genre probably has more to deep dive into than later editions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's yeah, well, definitely. Have you read much Tolkien, Ring? Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah,
but so, final thoughts.
This is an enjoyable little movie. As I said, if you're not used to watching black and white movies, it might seem a bit dated now. Like I said, it's over 90 years old. This movie.
Yeah.
Let's remember that it is over 90 years old, and as we said at the beginning, audio was the big revolution in cinema at this time. So we're very, but you can definitely see if you watch this, as we said, the elements of a lot of the great mob movies that have followed. You can see the elements in there. The basic ingredients for a lot of the great iconic mob movies to come are in this movie.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd say you probably can get just as much out of the movie just having it on in the background as you would from intensely watching it.
Yeah,
because
I hope so, because that's how I
yeah
consumed it.
yeah because once again it was made in 1930. Cinematography was still very much in its infancy. We're still we've just kind of started moving into the talkie stage of the movies, and we're still in the era where movies are largely just plays but filmed.
Yeah.
And it's so, there's not really a lot of like technical stuff that there to analyze on screen. And it's very straightforward with its presentation of, its morals. So, but yeah, give it a watch. I consider it a foundational text of the mob genre, but I'm not that well versed in the mob genre, so
Yeah. I'm maybe a little more versed in it, although probably not as well as some people that I know in the community who've watched who I know have watched an awful lot of these. I've watched quite a few, and it's a little bit of a fascination for me. Anyway, you can see some of the books I've got up here. For example, you can tell that this is a subject that does somewhat interest me. But yeah, like I said, it's worth it because you just said the basic ingredients are there for the genre in this movie.
And yeah, you have anything to shill?
I do, as a matter of fact. It's just the week. I've not really been active much on my channel the last couple of weeks, but I've got a premiere coming up in about little over an hour and a half. A bit, something like about an hour and 40 minutes, I think it is, so 5 p.m. UK time. It's actually a mirror of a stream I did last night that Claire Bear has very kindly allowed me to mirror. So we're talking it's a bit of a true crime things, myself, Claire, and Jay, talking about the insanity of the early black metal scene in Norway, and some of the insanity that took place there. So I will say, if you're a bit squeamish about certain subjects, there is a content warning, because there's things we talk about in there that's a bit, a bit extreme, shall we say?
Yeah.
But,
and if I remember right, next week is The Godfather. I think possibly just Godfather Part 1 followed by Part 2 the week after, but I'm not sure. We may end up compressing things because there was a missed week.
And I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say, can we not do Part 3?
I think we're going to take we're going to take the Badger stance when it comes to Godfather Part 3.
Yeah. I think that's the best thing. Noodle. Yeah, I think.
Noodle agrees. Part 3.
I knew I wasn't speaking just for myself when I said that. I know I'm speaking for some of the other co-hosts and probably the audience as well. Godfather 3 is non-canon.
Yeah. Let me put it this way. Noodle was the one who introduced me to The Godfather.
Mm.
They didn't, even they didn't want me watching part 3.
Mm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's
So there's that. Maybe, hopefully, sometime. I'll be like, hopefully this Saturday. I'll have to check with people, but I am going to be doing that Amazon Lord of the Rings trailer reaction thing. Coming soon sometime. And also next week. Yeah. But yeah, next week, we're probably only going to have enough time to cover part 1, because next week we're gonna have to end by 10 or 11 my time, so we are on a time constraint next week, because next week on the 20th, me and Bree are doing part 2 of the Starship Troopers over on their channel.
Yeah, and I'll say so we're gonna have to cram. We're gonna have to cram a bit in, because I think we're gonna have to cram a bit in, because as I say, The Godfather's a bit of a longer movie than Little Caesar.
Yeah.
I
Honestly,
don't agree with doing that before we're doing the first one, honestly. But
honestly, if we do end up having to, I'll put my suggestion on us, having to cut something in the like, if we're making chats, or if we're making cuts in the schedule, I am going to put that in our private chat.
Okay, it will.
Yeah. With that, I think we'll move to taglines.
I don't really do taglines, so just watch my premiere in about an hour and a half, or alternatively go and watch it from last night on Claire's channel. Either way,
Yep. And especially in regards to all the things we've said about Little Caesar, and how it's basically a morality play, and my rant on moralizing in media. Remember, the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think on. Too often, we forget that.
Cheers, Nudo.
Yeah.